This episode is brought to you by our sponsors Geomic. Geomic is an online manufacturing platform that the world's leading engineering teams use to get quotes, place orders for both prototyping or production parts. The platform's super easy to use, and you can invite your team members to review quotes, track orders, just at a click of a button. We do like our sponsors to give a little bit back to the community, so if you head onto the website, so that's geomiq.com, if you upload your file, you'll get £50 off your first order of CNC, injection moulding, sheet metal, 3D printed parts. You just use the code TRUE50, but the links will be around this video somewhere.
We're redesigning our website at the moment, and I did have a policy of no post-it notes.
Yeah.
But I think we're a bit limited with our imagery, so I think a few photos with post-its on windows have creeped in there.
So is this the future of industrial design? No post-it notes?
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Thanks for obviously coming on and joining us, Kevin. It's a pleasure. I know you've listened to a couple of the podcasts, and I don't know if you've met Drew before, PD and I or anything like that, or
the face looks familiar, but I've got a shocking memory.
I was going to say it's probably fair if I answer that, because we have, but I don't expect you to have remembered it because it was a long time ago at P Design I.
Okay.
I came to the first two of those and then missed maybe one or two. And then I was back as a speaker and as a panel guest, maybe once or twice years later, but I don't think you were maybe there then or part. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But when I spoke, Chris Leftery was hosting.
I stepped back after doing it for about 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I did the first 4, I think. And
were they the best 4?
Oh, cool. And then I came back once to be as a speaker, and I think I chaired a panel or something.
Cool. Well, it's been a bit weird that we've had lots of comments on LinkedIn and stuff about this one, and so you seem to have struck a chord with the industrial designers in the world, and to a point where there's too many comments to even go through. But we're planning on having a bit of a chat about what the future of industrial design may look like. So this might be a conversation you can play in 2026 and just laugh at, basically. We'll find out nearer the time. But I don't know if you firstly just wanted to perhaps introduce yourself, Kevin, to the few people that maybe not familiar with yourself and where you work and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm the founder of Plan, a product strategy consultancy in London. Founded that in 2004 with an old college pal, Mark Delaney. We focus on kind of the front end of innovation, navigating the early stages of innovation, basically.
Mm-hmm.
We focus on mobility and tech clients, and we're all industrial designers by background, but we do more than industrial. In terms of disciplines, I guess we do work that involves industrial design, UI, UX, service, business design. So we've kind of expanded. But you could argue it's all fundamentally the core ID skills.
Yeah. Is that evolved over those 20 years, just shy of 20 years in terms of what those services are, or particularly around this theme of what industrial design could look like?
Definitely.
Has that changed over time?
Definitely. I mean, just going back a little bit, before that, I founded the foresight departments or team at Seymour Powell. So I formed that in, the early 2000s. And I kind of prototyped it a little bit there, I guess. And back then it was very much around, lots of the work was around ethnography, which is a big thing back then.
Mm-hmm.
It's standard practice now, but it was more of a big thing back then. And we did a lot of sort of very visual sort of design fuel work, if you like, sort of design trends and design language frameworks and stuff like that.
Mm.
And we carried on doing that at Plan, but I guess over time, it's got probably less visual. So it was very, very visually, aesthetically and orientated in the early days, and we still do that, but the balance has changed. You know, it's more, I don't know, it's a wide range of things, but not every project requires the designer's eye, if you like, that aesthetic eye so much. We're definitely doing much more digital UX service stuff than before. We're definitely doing more stuff that overlaps more into business and management consulting. So yeah, it's widened, I guess, which I think that's the trajectory of the profession there.
Yeah,
we can probably come back to that.
Yeah, I think that was kind of it. That was, I mean, I didn't want to sort of deep dive into the comments too much, because I know Brad will do that, and I didn't want to sort of colour my own judgment. I really want to just sort of turn up as a clean sheet and really listen to what you've your thoughts, because I've done that before. I've listened to your lectures before, and there is always something in there that hadn't occurred to me. So I've tried to keep that little bit of naivety today. But just straight off the bat, the things you've touched on there about a designer's eye and what you can use that for. I think, well, you'll know better than I will. You've been in it for a lot longer than I have, but it's very clear that yes, you can use that to focus on visuals and on I don't know, ethnographic research, or on something to do with business over here. But the point being that it's those core skills that allow us to be so broad in what we work on, and thus the nature of industrial design versus something that's just solely product design is always this sort of ongoing source of debate.
Should we jump into the dinosaurs topic? There were various versions of that in the discussion, the death of industrial design, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, well, it's always funny, Kevin, when I talk to someone or I put something out on Instagram or something, and it's like, I think I put something the other day where it's like, we got Kevin coming on. What do you think the future of industrial design will be? And I think I just had like 10 comments that just said UX design, full stop. And it was just like, that seems to be the running kind of theme. And when you do talk to designers, maybe when they're at a point when they're starting to look for work or something, and they're maybe, that's the politest way of saying this, designers that are perhaps a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, and they kind of have to move on to pastures new, and they kind of, sometimes you do have honest conversations with them. They do feel like a bit of a designer saw, and they kind of think, oh God, am I going to be right for jobs that are out there, or is my skill set now not what it needs to be?
Yeah. I can tell you firsthand about how that feels.
Yeah.
Right in that now. I've been working for 15 years, and I'm like, what does the next 15, 20 years of my career look like? It's not going to be anything like what it was, and probably not what I trained for. But I mean, that's the thing. The training's always got to carry on. But I'll show.
But you've got to remember that most people weren't trained for their job. Right, so it's pretty. You've got doctors and lawyers and architects and things like that, but most people in jobs now have changed direction a few times, and they're not doing what they were trained for. So there's nothing particularly out of the ordinary there. But I think my take on this is, I think the opportunities for traditional, narrowly defined industrial designers have been in decline for decades, probably since I left college, to be frank. I wrote a dissertation for my final year at college called Post-Industrial Design, because everyone was talking about deindustrialization, blah, blah, blah. So if we're going into a post-industrial economy, where were industrial designers going to sit? So it's been a long running debate, but my take on it is that if you take the opportunities, the number of positions for classically defined industrial designers, they're diminishing, and they have been for a long time. But I think the demand for our core skills has never been bigger.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is that if we can just let go of the really tangible things that some people can fixate on about how great they are at sketching or CAD, or how much they know about injection molding or whatever, if we can, that they're important skills, but there's lots of other skills that's are less tangible, but business really, really values. So, it's been a massive thing for the last 10 years about user centricity. Well, there's lots of stuff that we took for granted through our training. It's just a massive thing in business that people just obsess about it. There's all sorts of HBR articles about user centricity, and we just take that stuff for granted. We're naturally sort of futures orientated. Most people are very much in the here and now. We're always daydreaming about the future. We're fascinated about change. That's a natural thing that we kind of just comes with the territory, but we just take for granted. We know that we're great creative problem solvers, but we tend to just focus that around products. But you can take that sort of approach very widely. I think we're great at sort of, and this came up in the LinkedIn chat, about we're great at sort of being cross silo, synthesizing marketing, brands, supply chain, consumer, pricing. We're able to take all that input and sort of make sense of it in our heads, which I think is really, really important. And we're, the visualizing and prototyping that we do around products, those skills can be used more widely. And I think really, really important is one of my favorite definitions of design is, and I think it's Charles Eames, is it's the best you can do by next Tuesday. It's that kind of really, really practical, resolving, finishing something. You must have worked with really, really smart people who just can't finish anything. They're always finding a more complicated problem to tackle and all the rest of it. So there's all these really, really brilliant skills that we've got that we kind of forget about, or we just don't value very highly. And there's all sorts of roles, but they include in UX. Sure, there's UX, but product management, and also just higher up. That there's lots of cross silo roles. That's about there's more and more industrial designers ahead of. A few have made it to CEO, but plenty of creative directors. They've got brand reporting into them and all the rest of it. So I think there's all sorts of roles within design and almost outside design, just generally in business and all the rest of it. But I think we've just got to, one, slightly let go of, I've been trained for this thing 20 years ago and I've got to stick with it. But also we've just got to kind of reconceptualize what our skill sets are and find ways of kind of selling them and articulating.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the point of trying to sell them and trying to communicate them, because obviously, as as designers that are gigging designers that are out there looking for work, one of the first things you build is your portfolio, and that's got some value to some hiring managers. But as you say, there's a wealth of skill sets and mindsets that we bring as a species that maybe be a little bit more tricky and nuanced to put across on a page or on a screen. Yeah,
I think we probably fall back on our portfolios too much, and I think if I've interviewed plenty of UX designers in my time, and some of them have got a design training, plenty of them have come from psychology or computer science or something. But they tend to be much better at telling a story and being passionate about stuff. And they don't tend to have a great portfolio, but they've often done very well for it. So I think it's rethinking what the skill sets are and how best to make them, bring them to life. It won't always be a sort of a render or a product shop.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always found, and please do correct me, but I've always found that when you talk about like UX design, I've always found it to be just very different in the sense of you talk about it, you kindly sent through to us like a slide deck for this kind of talk. I presume you've delivered the talk around the future design to a client or something like that. So you kindly sent us through to us. Did include a picture of Kevin McCullagh that I found quite amusing. But I've always found with UX design that it's a community based thing. So like, but whereas industrial design, it's a cottage industry, I would say. And as you kind of put on the slide deck, it was a bit of a cult, wasn't it? Kind of back in the day. So before we kind of go into like what the future could be, it may be best to start at the beginning, really, and what kind of themes over the past few decades have dictated why you think that the industry is going to go in a certain way.
Yeah, it's probably useful as well just to kind of set the altitude of what I'm looking at. It's quite a big picture. It's
of course, yeah.
Which CAD package is going to win out. So if we think about sort of past, present, future, just to sort of get things lined up. So I think some of the big I first started working in a consultancy. It's actually a placement when I was at college, but that was in the late 80s. So I've kind of been in the industry since then. And I think the big things that have really changed, the big drivers that have changed industrial design, I'd say there's probably 6 big things. So one is just global design. So that's just the globalization of the economy, global clients, global customers, global supply chains, all that kind of stuff. So that's really changed, and that's concentrated the number of companies. So, it's there used to be loads and loads of people making kind of consumer products, and now it's all boiled down to a few companies, for example. But so that's been massive. Another one has been, I've mentioned it a few times already, but CAD. When I first started working, it was rotring pens on the AO sheets and things like that. And just that it was 2D CAD and 3D CAD, and just the links with manufacturing and visualization. That's a massive change. Another one, and this is more of a sort of an approach, sort of mindset shift, was and we've talked about this already, but UX, experience design, surface design, that whole kind of journey-based, multiple touch point way of thinking about design, that it all flowed out of the book, the experience economy, that really took off in the late 90s, I think. Then soon after that, design thinking, which I was a big critic of at the time, and I still am in terms of the content of it. I think it was just a bit of a marketing meme that sort of got out of control. But really? Looking back on it now, it's had a massive impact on businesses. Even we can argue about the content, about how much substance there is there. But it's opened the doors to design. It's opened literally the C-suite's eyes to design. And when I did design in the early days, being a creative was like, it's a euphemism for being a bit flaky or a bit thick. Now it's pretty much the biggest compliment you can give anyone. Designers back then were treated a bit like kids. You were just brought in at the last minute, normally when the project was behind schedule and over budget. Now quickly strap some shapes around that, make it look good, you've got a week, sort of thing. And now we're a lot more involved, we're a lot more consulted, and the status of designers has risen massively in that time. So I think that's been a good thing. Another thing that came off the back of design thinking was the whole kind of business design thing, really thinking about propositions, value chains, business model canvas, all that kind of stuff. And then I think another important, probably the most important thing in some ways, well, I don't know, what equally important is the whole kind of lean, agile, startup thinking kind of approach of where, we got taught prototyping at college, but we left it quite late, really. And the whole startup thing has brought a lot more rigor to it. And, you prototype the proposition even before you've got an idea about how you're going to fulfill the proposition. So I think they're big shifts that have nudged different parts of industrial design along in different ways. And then I think in terms of the present, we've already mentioned a few of these things already. We're still getting used to remote working, and how best to, we've all spent a year or so on Zoom and Miro or whatever. Where I think foresight has become a lot more important. People are feeling that they've been blown around, whether it's been Brexit, Trump, Black Lives Matters, Me Too, diversity, COVID. I think there's a general more interest in we need to systematically think about the future in a more regular and wide angle way. A lot of I think diversity and sustainability have been big themes for the last few years, but I think there's just a lot more emphasis on, there's been some big mission statements, vision statements, principles put out there. How are we actually going to turn that into reality? So I think it's the rubber is hitting the road. So I think they're some of the big issues, I think, from the past and present. I'll probably stop there. I don't know if you want to.
Well, the thing that jumps to my mind is, just based on the last few, the last sort of point really mainly was, do you think that given how, let's just as a loose term, government tends to follow business by a couple of generations in their approach and method, do you think that there's a space in the future for design, well, I'll say design thinking, and again I'll use that term loosely, to be applied into more of those kind of areas?
It's a bit like the guy we had on, I can't remember the chap's name, really sorry. We had a chap on that was talking about the tax office, for example, were really keen on hiring designers. So like that kind of mindset or the skill set that you learn, is something that can apply to something. We were absolutely right, Kevin, where it's not just about injection molded parts. And so actually you can leave university now and enter a far broader range of positions, whereas maybe 20-25 years ago you might not have had the scope to really to broaden your horizon. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah. I mean, we don't do a lot of work with government. We tend to focus on private sector, but I guess there's two levels. Have you heard of government digital services? They're a UX team that they've got hundreds and hundreds of people working across government for different, whether it's tax or the NHS or whatever. So there's kind of lots of work at that level, but that's at the kind of UX level. But I think almost more directly to your point, Drew, is have you heard of the Policy Lab? So there's actually an ex-student of mine, showing my age, Andrea Schodmock. So she began as an industrial designer, but she ended up via the Design Council in the Cabinet Office.
Okay.
Using design kind of skills to inform policy. So you should maybe talk to her sometime. But I don't know lots about
I can imagine it'd be tough, Kevin, to get like the PR approval on something like that. The questions that we'd have to ask her, I don't think that would get the signed off, unfortunately, from Boris.
She's actually moved on to a different role now, but she was there for quite a long time.
I was about to follow up and say, actually, that's probably been happening for a long time. It just hasn't come across my radar in North Wales, but there you go. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that's another example. I mean, that people from design backgrounds have been spreading out into all sorts of different roles, and there's a lot of demand for those skills. They're just not called industrial design roles.
Do you think designers are getting better at? I've always found that sometimes that maybe I've gone on a conference call, listened into a group of designers talking. It almost feels sometimes that designers are great at just talking to designers about design.
Oh, definitely.
But outside of that, kind of, it can be quite difficult. Is that a trend you're noting, or actually because now design is entering the C-suite level, that actually there's a more openness, or designers are just generally getting better about talking about the value of design to others that are outside of the profession?
Yeah, I mean the contrast. Well, I think you could say that the more successful designers are probably better at talking to non-designers. But I think that was comments that came up a lot when we first did the PDI conference, Product Design and Innovation Conference, because I think it was the first forum, if you like, where the industrial design community could actually get together. And because we tend to be a pretty insular bunch, you know, a few people might meet up in a pub and moan about something, but compare that to the UX community, or go to a conference or a meetup at the drop of a hat. You know, they're continually, in some ways, what's interesting about the UX kind of fraternity is they're almost got more allegiance with their community than they have their present company. You know, they're always sharing ideas and you know, discussing the latest trends and all the rest of it, where I think industrial designers are a lot more head down and, you know, not looking up probably as much as they should be.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions I want to ask you about that, really, and so we started this not because of the pandemic; it was already on its way. It's just so happens that people became a lot more available. But it was as you described, to kind of to kickstart a bit more of a community feel, and especially for those of us who are working outside of some of the hotspots. You know, there are industrial designers or product designers or design engineers that are way off in the sticks all around the UK, that, you know, that don't have a Shoreditch postcode and feel like they're a little bit separated from it. And we thought, do you know what, if that's a common feeling, then there's probably at least you know, that's probably just the seed of a little bit of community there. And if we can just leave the NDAs and say, right, there's obviously going to be things that we know we can't talk about, but we know that we've got hundreds of shared experiences just from our sort of our day to day.
All still going through the same problems throughout.
Sorry?
All still going through the same kind of daily problems and struggles, and
once you get behind the cloak and dagger stuff, and you sort of you're through the looking glass, you're in that that open forum. The question that I wanted to get around to, I'll take as many turns as I can. Was that something similar with P-Design I? Because, as you say, that was the first one that I was aware of, and I think that was, as you alluded to, being the first one of its nature.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, it wasn't my idea.
Oh, really?
I was asked to be the chair, but it was set up by a kind of conference company. I think that they tend to do lots of conferences around plastics. I think they were behind the classic Plastic and Rubber Weekly magazine.
Yes. No, that's it. I've been teleported back. Yeah, PRW, absolutely. I used to go to those a lot, and it was sort of, they'll talk a bit about design. There might be something about make sure you get your gate position correct if you're going to design injection molding. But no, it was a very welcome conference at the time. You know, for me, it was like being in the same room as people who I'd read about and seen on television, and it made me want to do this as a profession.
Do you want to just briefly explain what PD&I was, Drew? Because there'll be people listening like that have maybe just starting out their career that have never heard of PD&I before, because it probably stopped a fair few years ago. So,
I mean, well, the first chair of the first 2 years is right.
Sorry, it's just
I'll take a swing.
Sorry,
it was a 2-day conference in Excel in London that was full of industrial designers and people who are interested in listening to industrial designers and, you know, people within that circle talking about design and the realities of it. Usually 20-minute presentations. I remember Frank Steffensen. It was brilliant. I was absolutely fascinated. The things he talked about in the first 15 minutes, which was just his preamble. And I remember him getting the 5-minute warning. He said, I haven't started yet. Just
Yeah.
the things that he had talked about in terms of biomimicry and his inspiration and walking past maybe an E-Type Jag as a small boy and just being fascinated. I think the room was silent, and it obviously hit a lot of people, close to their hearts. And I thought it had a big impact on me and my colleagues that went. We drove back from London after the second day, all fired up for how we were going to revolutionize the company from the ground floor up, right?
Right.
Didn't happen, but it was a good car journey at least.
Do you think a conference like that would still work today, Kevin? Or particularly even, I don't know, it's remote working, but we are kind of losing the kind of human element of it all, and I'm sure people would welcome being back in the same room as each other, kind of COVID permitting.
Yeah. I think so. But it's also true that that Zoom does make it easier to. I think there's been a whole blossoming of stuff happening remotely, but it doesn't work in large numbers. But I think the kind of stuff that you're doing is great as well as a complement to that. But I think it'd be great. But as you're right, it's not a big community, and not all of it is based around London. It's quite so it's just getting people together, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think there's plenty to talk about.
Yeah, and I'd imagine if PD&I, if it was done through a comms company or PR or something, they'll probably want a return of investment on something like that, and so it probably would have to be community led rather than some external company, because they might not make their money out of us lot anymore.
No, I personally wouldn't see it happening in the same way.
No.
Because I think the sort of 2 days of presentations, not. If you look at that crowd and the way that I speak for myself, my brain can't concentrate for that long. I need to do things, and I think there's a missed opportunity to have all those people together and not do something more workshoppy and thinking and I suppose productive. But I think there's definitely scope for a live event. For sure.
Yeah. So in terms of, I think we've covered the past, and we've kind of covered the present. So we've acknowledged the challenges that face us today. What is the future going to look like, Kevin? Is it going to be a good one? Because every time I turn the news on, it's not great, So is the future of industrial design a good place to be?
Well, I'm going to probably talk about 3 things that I think are going to be important, and it's emergent, but it's not particularly big yet. But I think the first one, and it got mentioned a few times in the LinkedIn thread, and that's sort of data aware design. And that's, to a certain extent, that's kind of coming in from UX. I think UX have been talking about designing with data for quite a few years now, and they've got a lot more access to data. They're in the digital realm. There's a lot more data to get your hands on there. But I think we're currently doing work with the client at the moment about how all design disciplines, including CMF, can make a lot more use of data, and that's different sorts of data. It can be sales data, competitive data, usage data, quantitative, qualitative, all sorts of different sorts of data. But I think designers, it's one of those new skills, I think, that designers are going to have to develop, or not have to, but some I think should develop. One is just to it's a new kind of superpower in terms of insight, I think, because it just enables you to think and on a much wider scale, think sort of internationally, if you like, and really get quite a nuanced view of things. So one is it's great if used well for insight, but 2, it's going back to this, having more influence with companies and senior management and clients and all the rest of it. Business is increasingly driven by data. They want evidence, they want it validated, and they want to be able to challenge the data. They want you to be able to challenge their data and discuss it in quite a sophisticated way. So I think that is going to be a big shift that I see happening. It's starting to happen in UX, little bits. It's always been around in ID, but we've been very much sort of dabblers in data, and I think we need to really up our game. And that's a new thing that we definitely weren't taught at college, that I think we probably should be taking more seriously.
Can I ask you a question about that? While we're on that, then, how does that affect the sort of the visceral reaction of the designer and that, those kind of designers that, again, talking broad terms just to make it sort of cartoonish and relatable, but those that are more ego-driven or a bit more self-possessed, let's say, rather than being more, again, to characterize it, passive to the decisions of the data, and albeit with insight and with analysis. What's the balance of power there, do you think?
Well, first of all, I don't think it should never be driven by data. It should be data-aware design.
Okay.
But the decisions should always be, I don't know, with the designer or product manager or whoever is appropriate. But I think it's not, I often like to sort of not have a false dichotomy between right and left brain, or rigor and creativity, or intuition and robustness, sort of thing. I think they've both got their places. And I think you could say that the intuition, the creative leaps should totally be there, and then treat them as hypotheses that you then try and validate with data. So that, I think that's in some ways the creativity can come first, and then you check it and look at it in a different way with data. So I don't think it's you throw creativity out the window, but you will be able to be much more persuasive with your creative ideas if you can marshal. It's not just my intuition. Look, I've done the homework to show that this is backed up and it's got some firm foundations.
A little while ago, I put a post on LinkedIn because it's just one of those things that's come up a couple of times before. You get these irritating responses to a piece of work, which might be, okay, appreciate the passion, things like that. Just really get me, because to me, it's not a process of passion. It's a professional process. Here's what we kind of thought. Here's what we saw as some insight. We developed, we prototyped, and then we went and did all this resonance testing work. We got all this quantitative and qualitative data. So yeah, as you say, here was our initial stance. It got changed by something that we learned over here. We wound up over here, and that sort of those kind of responses, or that's very creative work. So it's actually not. It's it was a lot of science. Sorry, just a little bit of something off my chest.
So do you see that kind of influence of data across the board, Kevin? So if you're a designer in a 2-person design agency, do you still see that as relevant to maybe someone that's working in a large kind of corporate business or whatnot? Is it something you see across the board, or it's just going to be more relevant for some rather than others?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be more relevant to the bigger companies, and it'll be sector specific. But there is just a general avalanche of data from different sources, and just knowing what's available, and you just can't get away with all we're going to do is talk to 6 people, and then we're going to go ahead. And it's not, just to be clear, I'm not just talking about design testing. I'm not talking about putting models in front of lots of people, or visuals in front of people and just getting quantitative feedback. I'm just talking about, well, my thought is I think there's a massive market over here and we should do this for them. Well, okay, well, let's get some sense of how big that market is before we start going too far down that line. So we're just, because there's so much data around now, you can do things that you just couldn't do before. And I think that's just got to be brought in as one of our new weapons, I think.
And that will help designers with their, I suppose, the business acumen and kind of engaging with that side of the fence through data, and because like everything, things it does need to be a return of investment on and tracked and a lot of these kind of things. So totally kind of get where you're coming from. So we got data, but there's a couple other weapons, is there, Kevin? Or?
Well, I don't know if it's a weapon, but I shouldn't have used that. Another one is, I've written quite a lot about this, and I call it the human-machine interlace. So there's lots and lots of hype around AI, and it's normally posed in the robots are going to steal all our jobs. And my take on it is that it's not so much replacement. It's not like machines replacing jobs or replacing humans, including designers. It's more about machines, AI, algorithms have got strengths, humans have got strengths, and those algorithmic strengths are going to get stronger over the years, and we'll want to look at our jobs and our projects more and more to think, right, which bits am I going to outsource to the algorithm? That might be, for example, going back to the data, that might be just right, dunk a load of data into the insight bot, and like come back with some ideas, or I've got some constraints here. I'm going to set up some constraints in my CAD model, generate a load of options within those constraints or something, and I'll choose. There's lots of different ways, but I think what we'll end up doing is it will slightly change, or maybe radically change, our workflow, where some bits of it will kind of partner or outsource to a machine to do something for us, and it will be often it'll be quite micro. So in say user research, it could be just finding the right people to talk to, because they've got big data and you can zoom into just the right profile. Or it could be that a little bot does a transcript for you or something like that. Or when you're choosing colors, it's automatically generating complementary palettes or something like that. But I think it'll be quite micro, and it'll be probably built into many of the tools that we're already using. But I think that there'll just be we'll be working alongside, almost invisibly, almost without knowing. We'll be working alongside sort of not necessarily intelligent machines, but machines that can be useful to us and make us potentially more productive. But again, it depends on how it's implemented. If it's just used to, right, we can do something. If we use this technology, we can do it quicker and cheaper. That won't lead to a good place. But if we use it to, right, we want to free up some of this mundane work that we're doing, so we can use that time to do what we're really good at, and the stuff that the machines can't do around taste and judgment and anticipating what's going to happen in a few years' time and all the rest of it.
Does that sound similar to you? I mean, it sounds similar to me, but I mean, I think you were probably there more than I was, to the introduction of CAD, for example. Mm-hmm. You talked about, we can make this thing go faster and therefore cheaper, or we can free up more time to get more detailed on this bit, and we can think about these sort of things over here. And I suppose there's probably a similar pushback as well of it being maybe seen by some as a de-skilling of the job. Does that sound familiar at all, or am I way off?
Yeah, I was there at the beginning. Well, a 3D CAD anyway. So I actually did I started but didn't finish a PhD on what influence 3D CAD was going to have on the design process. And there was lots and lots of hype in the early days of Alias, that we would throw out our sketch pads, we would throw away our magic markers, we wouldn't need workshops. Mm-hmm. We would just sketch with sculpt virtual clay with our VR goggles on. Yeah, this was being talked about in in the 80s. And we would polish it all virtually, and then we'd press a button and it would start getting made in China. That was almost the way people were thinking. And of course, it didn't quite happen that way. And CAD is a very important skill, but it was a lot more to do with, you could argue, it had a lot more to do with just collaboration with engineers and things like that, that it really changed, and just the ability to produce really high fidelity prototypes really quickly and iterate and all the rest of it, and produce much more complex assemblies or whatever. So it definitely has similarities in terms of the hype around AI and what people think it's going to do compared to a more nuanced reality, I'd say. I think that's true. But I think what's different is that CAD was always, you were always in control. It was amplifying your skills, if you like. Whereas what I'm talking about with AI is you're still hopefully making most of the decisions, but you're not totally in control. You're just giving some constraints to something or whatever, and this algorithm is generating options or deciphering something for you, or
which is exactly the same as delegating to a junior or an offsite team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you listen to Benedict Devons at all, but he talks about machine learning as just thousands of interns. it can do sort of the job that an intern can do, but times 1,000. But that's it's quite a nice way of thinking about it, really.
Hopefully the machines are getting paid, because the interns sometimes aren't. I was like,
they are at plan.
They are at plan. I'll use that as like a little clip or something, just for your own advertising, whatever. But so in terms of some of the things that are kind of happening now, so you talk about some of the main challenges around sustainability, for example. It's quite current, because I had a chap called me, young designer, called me the other day. Works for I won't tell who he is because his boss is probably listening, but he works for an agency here in the UK, and it's within FMCG, so that's a lot of the kind of the main application of it. And he's been there for about a year and a half, something like that, and he was a bit fed up. And I was just like, what's the issue that you're kind of going through? And it's working with this kind of massive company, and I feel bad kind of going to sleep at night because the products are 85% single-use plastics and things like that. And one observation I've noticed from just going into universities and I wouldn't say lecturing, it's more rambling really at kind of kids about portfolios and stuff, but some things that they're just super, super passionate about is sustainability. And I wonder if as these kind of young designers start to develop their careers and they'll eventually end up in management positions and in hiring and whatnot, I wonder if their views will change as they enter the world of work, or whether it will be a real kind of driving force kind of for them going forward. I was just particularly interested by one particular guy that was just almost frustrated about some of the kind of efficacy of where he's working, and I was just kind of maybe naively explained to him, but that's just kind of what work is like. And I just don't know if it's like a generational thing of maybe kind of young designers are going to be perhaps more passionate about other things than maybe kind of designers of the previous generation.
So are you asking if the students now who are passionate about sustainability are going to find it tough when they actually get into?
I'd be interested. Do you think they'll see it as as something they can kind of change the world, but actually design is a lot more complex than that, and sometimes you're part of a very small part of something. I just interested in your thoughts on whether some of these present challenges will be different as a younger generation start to enter the workplace and start to get involved, really.
Well, I think it's about your understanding, your personal take on sustainability, because there are lots of different competing takes, if you like. But I think the first thing to say is that they're unlikely to meet much resistance at the top level ambition, because all our clients are trying to do whatever they can in that. But then but as soon as there's lots of sustainability goals and all the rest of it. But then once you get into the nitty gritty of particular questions, it's trying to weigh up very different things. So it is a rise in emissions worse than slightly more acidic materials, and how do you weigh those two things up? And then there's the question of perception and reality. So some people think not just single-use plastics. A lot of people think plastics are evil. I think it's just massively misinformed. Even single-use plastics in FMCG keep food fresher for longer, so there's less food waste. Blood is carted around in plastic containers. But plastic is an incredibly useful material for all sorts of different reasons. And I think to a certain extent, I think designers need to just educate some of the simplistic assumptions about it. So I think that I really got into green design in the 80s, and the more I looked into it, the more riddled with contradictions it was, to be honest. So it's no longer an area of expertise, I must admit. There's other people at Plan who have done a lot more work in it than me. But I guess my top level of observation, yes, it's complicated, and the top level moralizing about it is normally way off the mark when you actually look at it. But once you do get into it, there's all sorts of trade-offs, and very, very complicated trade-offs to make that aren't on the same dimension. You're comparing apples with oranges with bananas and trying to weigh them all up.
Yeah,
and a lot of it is around perception and storytelling rather than anything that's kind of particularly measurable.
I suppose that kind of stuff isn't necessarily explained to you when you're watching a Netflix documentary about these kind of topics. So yeah, I can see how those kind of viewpoints can start to form. I don't know if you had any particular things you wanted to say, Joe, but I was just going to ask a question about Strangest Brief. I don't know if you had any other observations at all about the future of design or what we've been talking about for the last hour and a bit.
Me, no, I'm just worried. I'm a bit concerned about.
You worried about the robots, say?
Yeah. No, it's more about, okay, so there's conflicting, again, complex issue. Probably don't have time to cover it in a huge amount of detail, and I'm certainly not in a position to have a huge amount of insight on that either. But it's just around design education and around what that was like at the start of your career versus what it was like post 1977, when everybody was bourgeois. Now we can all go to university, and where we get to now, where it's again prohibitively expensive. And so there was an article in the Times that I saw that said that in 4 years there'll be 1 million new students going to university. I know that design, it was pointed out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you, LinkedIn. That okay, demand for design education is in, or at least demand for product design education is in decline. And I sort of think, well, okay, I think there's a lot of different moving parts there, but I do think there needs to be more readily available, meaningful alternatives to a university system for people who want to be design professionals. Let's not box them into this category or this category. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that as a sort of, as a last minute one.
Yeah, a couple of different angles on that. I think first of all, I actually I started off in engineering. I took a bum steer, and I told my design teacher at school I wanted to design the next XR3, the Ford XR3. Older listeners might remember that. And they told me, because they were basically woodwork teachers, they told me that I needed to be an engineer because engineers design cars.
Yeah.
So bit of a bum steer, but I ended up at university doing engineering and hating it. And long story short, I ended up at Newcastle Polytechnic. And, you know, I think the year after I left the Polytechnic, it became a university. But I personally think that, what is it? I think, is it something like 40% of graduates, university graduates, are doing jobs that you don't need a degree for or something?
Yeah, so something similar. It's
something like that. And I personally think that we lost something in that's justifying of more vocational based colleges like polytechnics, which I think Germany still has that more stratified thing, and more academic based universities. So I think we've lost something there, and there is talk of revisiting that. I don't think it's going to happen, but there is talk of opening that one up again. And I think a lot of kids are better served on going on a more sort of vocational based course. You know, that they're very able, but maybe not particularly academic. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing is that I won't get into how expensive it is and everything, but which it entirely is.
It's a family show, Kevin.
Yeah, but I would say that design education has been incredibly slow to react to what we talked about at the beginning of the conversation about how design has changed so much and how our core skills can be applied in so many different areas. So I still, there must be by now, but I don't know of an undergraduate UX course.
No.
You know, there probably is one, but I don't know of it.
Sorry, there are kind of external courses that people can go on, like because I can't name them from the top of my head. General Assembly, that's the one. But I don't know if they're necessarily that well received within industry, but there are external kind of providers you can go to.
I mean, they're sort of 6-week night courses and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a BA. So, you know, it's been clear for a couple of decades that there's new branches for people from industrial design to go to. It's UX, it's service, it's more sort of business orientated areas. And I'm just amazed that design courses haven't restructured themselves to maybe have a common first or second year or something, and then you're able to branch out into different directions. I'm sure there's very good sort of bureaucratic kind of inertia reasons for that not happening, but from the outside they just seem to be very clay-footed in terms of responding to the real world, and they know it's happening because, you know, my college is very much in touch with you know, its alumni, and they know that, you know, the different directions people have gone in. But yeah, that strikes me as because it makes sense for product design, number of product design students to go down if there's so few jobs out there.
Yeah. I don't want to shamelessly plug Design Truth, but we do actually have an episode coming up. I don't even think I'm told to do this. It might be next month or so, with a guy called Matt Sinclair. And Matt Sinclair is one of the sorry, Matt, if you listen, I think you're a program director on the top of my head at Loughborough University.
I know, Matt.
Yeah, and they've just designed a new course, I think, that's starting next year with industrial design, and he's coming on to chat to us about it, about the decisions made, and maybe some of the points you just made there, Kevin, about how you go about designing a new program for modern day kind of industrial design. So there's my shameless plug there for Design Truth.
Well, following on that, maybe there's a role for sort of design recruiters to play that role of mapping out those different career pathways. You know?
They don't want my opinion, I can tell you that. But just whilst you're here, we do like to finish every episode by asking a particular question. It's been ducked a few times, it's the nature of it, but we've also had some quite amusing answers, and it does make us smile as we leave the call. But it's, what is the strangest brief you've ever come across, and I don't know if you've been rattling your brain for the last couple of days, stewing on anything that's ever come across your desk and thinking, this is one of the worst ideas I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with anything strange or amusing, I'm afraid. But I'll swerve it and sort of bend it to one of the most surprising briefs.
Okay.
I've had, if you don't mind. And that was when I think he was like chief design officer of a massive brand, probably a top 10 brand, probably more known for its sort of marketing prowess than its design, but the design was excellent. He came to us. I mean, we've done other projects with him, but he came to us and said, "My CEO wants the rest of the company to work like designers." And the design. If you rounded up all the designers in the company, it was probably about 1% of the company. Mm. And this CEO had just loved what he'd seen, the quality, the creativity, the productivity that was coming out of the design team. He was just amazed by. So he started to sort of hang around the design studio a bit and just observe what was happening, and talking more to this CDO. And he said, we could all work like this, or in his opinion, not exactly like this, but there's elements to the way you work I would like the rest of the company to do. So we ended up working together with him, not on yet another design thinking course where you in half a day you become a design thinker. It was a bit more sort of structural than that, and just coming up with ways of working, different sort of internal plumbing within the organization, some rejigging, incentivization, kind of structures and frameworks and all that kind of stuff. But it was very much about, and I just thought it was amazing that a CEO of a sort of top 10 brand, and they're, I'm not going to say who they are, but they're absolute sort of case study sort of brands, was actually saying, I know we're known for marketing, but we're too slow, we're too reliant on external, all these different things, and I want the rest of the company to work like you. And I guess that comes back to, it was a very, very vivid example of something that I said earlier about, we industrial designers underestimate and almost forget and take for granted lots of their strengths, and probably over fetishize certain strengths and almost forget other ones. And some of those ones that we forget about can really impress, CEOs. So it was a fascinating project, but just very surprising that it got to that level.
Now, are they all thinking like designers and working like designers?
There's a longer story to that. Yeah. The CEO didn't stay the full duration.
Oh no. Oh well.
Spent too much money on post-its and marker pens.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Design Truth. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you ever want to be involved, track us down at hello@designtruth.co.uk. Appreciate Kevin spending part of his evening with us. And of course, thanks to the sponsors of this episode, Geomic. Final reminder, if you use the code TRUTH50, you get £50 off your first order with them for CNC, injection moulded sheet metal and 3D printed parts. Links in the description. Hopefully you guys are getting out and about, down the tools for a little bit, and I'll see you on the other side.